Welcome back from lunch, everyone. I hope you had a nice cool down after your presentations. Finalists, great job again. We had a very stimulating conversation over in the judging room, and I'm very excited to announce those results. In a little bit, we're going to make you wait a little bit longer because I am joined on stage by Weston Ballard, who you heard about from Perry this morning, and Emily Sheng. They are both current second-year MBA candidates at the Stanford Graduate School of Business. Prior to her MBA, Emily was a product design engineer at Apple, where she led the design and development of key mechanical parts within iPads, MacBooks, and Apple Pencil. After becoming a caregiver for her two grandmothers, she has been passionate about age tech. Currently, she's building Honest Care, a platform connecting professional caregivers to open shifts at home care agencies. Weston is the founder and CEO of Goldie, a new social connection platform for adults age 55 plus that aims to take on some of the loneliness epidemic and its substantial impact on health and well-being. Weston is also a research fellow with us at the Stanford Center on Longevity. Prior to Stanford, Weston served on the board of two nonprofits, one supporting LGBTQ plus community development, and the other supporting youth experiencing homelessness in the Rocky Mountain region. And he also worked with Deloitte Consulting, supporting its new venture creation and innovation practice. Emily and Weston are both in the early stages of their longevity ventures, and relevant to Perry again, Emily went through Launchpad last spring, and Weston started last week.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And I brought them up here today to share with the finalists and the rest of you what it's been like getting started in the longevity space. So what challenges and surprises they've been coming across that might be helpful to share with our audience. And also what has led you here and what has inspired you to be in this space. So I have a few questions to get us started, and then we would also love to open this up for Q&A from the finalists and the audience as well. So I'd like to start with how you got interested in this space. I alluded to it a little bit with some introductions, but Emily, it's often sort of these personal life events that propel people into this space to solve a problem that they encountered in their own lives. Can you tell us a little bit about how you got started?
Absolutely, and it's a pleasure to be here, and good luck to the finalists, and sorry that we have to be between you and knowing, but here we are. So I sort of fell into the longevity space, and it wasn't something I had been intending to do until after I graduated from college. It was 2020, the beginning of the pandemic. I moved over to the Bay Area to start my full-time job, but I also became a full-time caregiver for one of my grandmothers who lives here. And I was helping her through a life transition, going from a very independent, lonely life to a fully assisted one. And that was a really difficult transition for both myself and my family to go through. And it inspired me to look for problems within the aging space that could be compelling. And since coming to the GSB and coming back to the safety net of school, I've been exploring different areas within the aging space, anywhere from remote monitoring all the way to helping professional caregivers. And I've found that it's been so meaningful to work on problems that I truly care about and problems that really affect the people that I love and care for in my life. And since then, it's been a really fun time, even in all the ups and downs, and excited to be able to share part of that journey with so many of you who are looking to follow a similar path.
And I think we'll get to the sort of the challenges that we experience in a moment. But Weston, can you tell us a little bit about how you got started with Goldie?
Yeah, absolutely. So coming to the GSB last year, I think I came here with very much so an open aperture of what's the next experience in this own transition. I know a lot of you are talking about transitions too, but I was thinking about my own as coming into this really crazy and dynamic environment. And I think two things really came to life for me, and they were big realizations that have helped me get on the road to Goldie. One, while I'm not in a position of needing to step up and be a care provider to a loved one, that doesn't mean that there's a lot of experiences where we're stepping up to provide social care, social connection in place of any sort of community, meaningful, social group or community that a lot of our aging loved ones struggle to find. And one thing that I think we especially found through Goldie was that these life transitions do lead us to have significant hardship in maintaining those social connections and building them as we age. So that was definitely one of the primary reasons from an external perspective as to why I wanted to get involved in learning more about how social connection and companionship evolve as we age and what that journey looks like. The second experience I think was really getting involved with the Center on Longevity, which happened serendipitously, just taking the course that a number of members here at the Center on Longevity teach over the GSB, exploring longevity business implications. I think that was the first time I really saw longevity less as something that's actually 50 and up focused and more about rethinking what can our entire life look like if we think about, one, our life as not a single peak and then a decline, but also the opportunity to continue a path towards reinvention and exploring the art of the possible with what life provides us. And so in that connected really well with this experience I was having with understanding how social connection can inform what the art of the possible looks like for us at any life stage, and that there's no reason that shouldn't be equally as accessible as we grow older.
And so as you've gotten started, I think one of the reasons we brought you up here is because you're sort of, maybe you're very in touch, maybe too in touch for your own taste with, the earliest challenges of startup life. So I'm wondering if you can each tell me about, what's one of the earliest sort of hardships or valleys that you've faced, and how have you been working to get past that?
Yeah, I'm happy to start. Too many. But one that comes to mind is definitely more on the team building aspect. Your team is so important. It's kind of impossible to build a project or a company by yourself, and you really need people around you to support that vision. And so making sure you're working with people who you really enjoy working with, and also understanding how you yourself and your teammates respond under pressure is so important. And I've already pivoted between a couple of different ideas within the past 2 years. One example that comes to mind is a wearable startup that I worked on for 6 months with a team of 5 who I thought we were going to work on together post-graduation, but ultimately ended up falling apart. And the reason for that is because we didn't really understand everybody's incentives and the visions that we all had in mind, and seeing that in conflict under a period of more pressure because we were trying to figure out a problem under a short amount of time really resulted in our team crumbling apart. And so for me, one of the core pieces to get right as you work through your venture or your project is really like making sure you're building a great team.
There are aplenty, but one I think maybe to dive into, and it's a good perspective to start thinking about this as much as you already have, is how am I going to either make money or fund this? And the question of no money, no mission on driving a business forward, whether it's for-profit or not-for-profit, is a huge question. And I think, especially for myself, in the initial phases of research and ideation, it's exciting to move forward in this process of finding something that really works for people. And then this next question of, okay, but how am I going to support this with a sustainable model of being able to scale and make the most impact accessible to as many people as possible? And so, I especially have gone through all the different rabbit holes of, okay, what does selling into a Medicare Advantage plan looks like? Okay, what does billing Medicare directly look like? Okay, what is the VC path going to look like? And can I balance the outcomes and desires of what a VC mentality is versus the social impact I'm trying to drive? And it raises a lot of questions of, is the structure I've built for the product that I'm trying to create the best one? And making sure that you're keeping that question top of mind as you continue building your company. And truly that there's really no correct answer. It's not, I'm of the belief that just because something is VC backed doesn't mean it is the most important or it's the ideal or the best outcome for how you're structuring your business. You need to do a deep reflection of the kind of organization and the kind of impact that you're trying to drive and make the model work for that so you don't sacrifice that in the long run.
When we were chatting last week and you said the phrase, essentially the challenge of trying to monetize ethically. And this is sort of, how have you started thinking about that as you're pursuing these ventures that are really for the better of people, but, you're also trying to make it into a viable business?
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of one thing. I'm really kind of stuck right there on understanding like what is the initial wedge I'm trying to create for Goldie. It seems a lot easier to start in affluent neighborhoods of Atherton and Menlo Park and Palo Alto to get the service out the door, refined, and on a way to scalability so that I can eventually maybe move into some of these communities that have less infrastructure and could really stand to benefit from what I'm trying to provide through Goldie. But is that the best mechanism of using my time and resources and funding? Is it actually the way to do it so that I can build something scalable in order to then subsidize the rollout of Goldie into some of these more disenfranchised communities? These are kind of the questions that I wrestle with now, and I don't think there's a clear answer, and continue to kind of toy with those options. But it's an important question to wake up every day and kind of ask yourself, or every time an option is slipped across to you at the table, of what are the implications of doing it this way? Who's being brought to the table by taking this, and who's being left out of the table conversation by moving forward in this direction? And I think it's important to surround yourself with people who will ask that same question of you and ask that same question of themselves. Back to Emily's point on how you build a team and the standard you set for yourself and the impact you're trying to drive.
Yeah, and then really quickly to add to what Weston mentioned, it's super important to understand what is your societal outcome that you want to change in the world, and then kind of back it out from there and think about what's your theory of change? How are you going to get there? What are the small steps you're going to take to get to that leap at the end of the day? And then there really is no right way to balance societal impact with making sure that you have the monetary means to actually grow and build your business out. But some ways that people like to think about it is in terms of impact metrics. So what are the 2, 3, 5 key things that are trackable and are measurable that you can use to keep yourself accountable and your team accountable on those changes that you do want to make?
Okay, I want to ask you one more question before we open it up to the audience. And that is, so you're both currently students while you're on your founder journey, and same with all of our finalists. What are you finding to be the advantages and disadvantages of trying to, be a startup while still being a student?
Good. Okay. It's a lot, but I put it. I'm not balancing raising a family, or have a partner who's not kind of also putting themselves through the same thing. So whether it's school or whether it's something else in life, or caring for an aging loved one, there's always going to be a lot of things to balance. So pull out school and put in any other Mad Lib word, and it's always figuring out how to make the balancing act work. I'll say there's a lot of advantages that I found to being able to be Stanford grown in the initial ideation, from having such incredible thought partners like the Center on Longevity to work with on finding a path forward in a problem space that I really care about, to Launchpad that is through the School of Design that both Emily and I have gone through or are currently going through in order to kind of test this, events like this, the design challenge. Plenty of other experts, insights, programs, student-based funding opportunities that are, in some worlds it's just free money because you're a student. Like, take advantage of all of those things. And I can imagine that for all of the universities that you're from, like, there's some varying degree of those resources, and make sure you are able to get it and make the most out of it, because I think it only helps you launch more successfully, and whether you succeed or fail, you have built a network of people to help you on the next iteration and to bring along with you. And what an amazing group of people and academics who are trying to push the boundaries of thought and our knowledge, and what we stand to know is truth, right? People to bring along with you. So I think you have a great ally in continuing to make academia a friend of yours.
Yeah, and I couldn't have said it better. Just an advantage and disadvantage is just the amount of opportunities that are available as a student is kind of incredible. Disadvantage is that you have so much optionality. Being a founder and working on your own business takes a really strong stomach. You have to think about, do I want to be involved in this business a year later, 2 years later, 5 years later, even when I'm probably earning minimum wage or no wage sometimes, and think about, is that going to affect you and your lifestyle, your family, your expectations, et cetera. And that's a really important decision to make. And knowing that you're potentially giving up a set life at Google for your startup is something to weigh in mind. And then on the advantages, there are just so many like opportunities in terms of classes, funding, and also in outreach, because folks are much more likely to reply to you when you're reaching out with a .edu email than if you replied using your Gmail account. And that's something really powerful and very valuable, and something that definitely take advantage of if it's something you're looking to use to test out your next idea.
I mean, I think I'd add maybe quickly in that there's an opportunity cost to it all. I mean, I can reflect on the really cool classes at the GSB that I'm not taking because I need to make sure that I have time to work on my startup and push things along. But it's a good gut check for you too. Like, is it worth it for you? When things are hard, is it worth it for you? And those are questions that should come up sooner rather than later, so you're not prolonging something that you think you are not all into. It's not, you know, a forced situation, but use these kind of like little signals as momentum or moments for pause and reflection on, you know, the direction you're going, the people you're working with, and the idea you're trying to bring to life.
Is it worth it, Weston?
It's all worth it. It's all worth it. 10 out of 10, I would do it again.
Any questions from the audience? Now's your chance. Go ahead.
Thank you both so much. I'm wondering, you're both in the longevity innovation space, but I'm imagining in conversation with other people who are working in other fields. Does it seem to you like there is anything special about working in longevity innovation as opposed to other fields, or is it just like anything else?
Yeah, so the two things that stand out to me whenever I'm chatting to other folks who are building in different fields are, number one, market size, and number two, mission. So market size, well, with the aging population, we're only ever going to have more and more customers or more people, and it's a big problem for everyone, not just America. And so I think it can be really attractive to a lot of folks to innovate in this field because it's been previously overlooked. There's a lot of white space anywhere you look. You can basically throw a pin in a haystack and you can find something that will turn into something, which is really great. And then on the mission side, for me, it's very fulfilling to be working on a problem space that is going to be helping other people that I care and love. And for some folks, having a mission is what makes or break a really hard day. For other people who are motivated by other things, maybe not so much, but it really just comes down to your personal preference on that. But I personally find it really motivating to have a mission.
Yeah. I mean, I think for me, like, what I came to understand why I really dove headfirst into longevity was that longevity is not just like the study of being older. It is, to me, it's the study of understanding like what a full life looks like and how from birth to growing old, what that experience can look like and how you can make those transitions seamless and how you can make every moment matter along the lifeline. And age is it's a fascinating aspect of our identity because tomorrow we're older than we are today, and times that by however many years, like we'll all hopefully be at that point at some point in time. And so to think about building for ourselves and what we think we need and what we want from looking at those that are older than us now is important, but also considering building the world that you want to age into as well. Like it is a benefit to consider both the intrinsic and the external impact and mission you're pushing for.
The power of the microphone. Can you both talk about what the biggest pivot was that you've taken in your entrepreneur journey? Biggest business pivot.
Go ahead.
Okay, I'll go first. I alluded to this before, but for about 6 months, I was working on a wearables monitor that could track stress and sleep, and it was going to be used for remote monitoring of older folks. But we ended up dropping that idea, partly because one of our co-founders whose research this leaned on got an offer to become a professor, and so he decided to pursue that instead, and hence the optionality. It's really important to keep track of. But on top of that, for anyone who is working on a hardware product, what we should have done was more homework on the underlying research and literature to see what is foundational and what has enough validation already in the scientific world that is widely agreed upon, and what does not. What's still like pseudoscience that we need to go figure out. And then for us, we figured out that because our wearable was so new and the biomarkers we were tracking were so new and not really used day to day in the doctor's office, there really wasn't a compelling enough use case that had customers that were willing to pay for it in a year's time. So for us, that was enough risk for us to decide to step away from the project entirely and to pivot to something else.
Yeah. So when we started our research, and when you come to the table and have a 45-minute conversation with someone about companionship and social connection, a lot of the conversations we're gearing toward understanding like the dating experience when you're older. And so, well, I won't call it a pivot, it was probably like a direction that we had to use the power of research to correct, because a lot of these conversations were gearing towards dating online is terrible, the world is riddled with fraudulent scammers, everyone who I'm talking to is not who they say they are, it's unverifiable information. And when you stop and realize, am I asking the right question, actually? And opening it up to like, how has that evolved as you age? What did that look like when you were married? How did that look like when your kids were at home or before this health event? That's when we got to this bigger question and problem of social connection through life transition is something that is still an unsolved need for millions of people in this country and across the world, because we had some folks from abroad as well. So. Well, it's less of a pivot, but more about make sure that you continue to ask yourself if you're asking the right question and think deeply about how you structure feedback collection from the people you're aiming to serve.
Thank you so much for sharing your experience. I am a psychology researcher, and I deal with mostly like quantitative research, and I'm really curious, like in your experience creating your companies, and you would get a lot of kind of qualitative feedback from whether the investors or the customers and everyone else, like inside or like within your discipline or outside your discipline. I'm really curious, like how do you go about selecting what type of quantitative feedback that's most helpful for you, and how to implement if they're very like diverse and everyone has their own opinions, like what's the most important thing to your business idea?
Yeah. So a lot of the feedback we've gotten for Goldie has been qualitative, mostly in the nature of loneliness being a subjective experience and trying to understand the details that surround it. But I will say, and I go back to an earlier point I made on like who's going to pay for this, there's a lot of quantifiable data when it comes to talking about the health impacts and the health costs of loneliness, and that drives 300% increased risk of admission into ER or 50% increased risk and expedition of developing dementia, and all these other quantifiable points where you start to get a really exciting question of, can we drive like a causal relationship between what we provide and actually decreasing the likelihood of these health events occurring for people? And then kind of backing into the question of like what kind of medical instruments or tracking metrics could we use to actually define that over time. So that's kind of where we've thought a lot about pulling in quantifiable data, but I think right now like there's still a big question mark on making sure that we're getting like the subjective and the qualitative answered in the service that we're seeking to provide.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I think you need both, like qualitative and quantitative. Data is super important. I'm an engineer by training. I love quantitative data. Sometimes frustrates me that all we get at sometimes is just qualitative data. But I think where it really shines is qualitative data is great for just understanding your space. So I'm a big believer in going to first principles and just asking questions and talking to as many people as possible, interviewing as many people as possible, just to really understand where the problems lie, without an agenda and without any like idea of what your solution might be. And then once you talk to enough people, the top problems will start to emerge, and then those are the ones that you can start testing. And then where quantitative data comes in use is when you are making decisions between two feature sets, for example. It's relatively easy and relatively cost-effective to design two different websites offering two different features and push that out through Facebook, Instagram, other sites, what have you. And that's a good way of collecting quantitative data, but I always like to back up the quantitative data with the qualitative stuff and like have those 5 to 10 more in-depth customer interviews with like a small user focus group that you have constructed yourself, just to make sure that you have like a sanity check along with the numbers. Because sometimes numbers are, especially at small scale, are not always very reliable.
Thank you. Any lingering questions? Caitlin.
So coming from a background where, for example, as you move from like consumer electronics and hardware in that sphere into kind of healthcare wearables, how have you been able to kind of bridge the gaps in knowledge from going in these two types of spaces and having to learn all this new information to make sure you're designing the right hardware that's operating correctly?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think there are a lot of design principles that you can scale to almost anything, and especially coming from a more creative engineering background, I think a lot of those skills are very applicable to building a startup. I think the fact that you can use the scientific method on any kind of experiment that you want to run for your startup is really useful. So if you're, let's say you're designing a cane and you have 5 different types of grips that you want to test out, you would have like the skills to not only design and build those 5 different prototypes, but also the skills to like go out there and test them with users and collect that feedback. So I think there's a lot that you can transfer over, and it's not actually a huge step away from being at a large tech company versus working on your own. There are other parts that I think need a little bit of learning, which are a little bit more high touch, like managing your peers or understanding what to include in your business model canvas, or kind of like market maps, et cetera. But if you're talking just about like the design and the customer-centric stuff, I think a lot of those skills are transferable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'd just say expertise that you don't have shouldn't be a reason not to enter into a space. It's probably one of the first things you should do when building a team, and build that expertise in so that you have a diverse set of perspectives, being able to tackle the problem that you're chasing. And I kind of always just go back to, and Emily's touched on it, just be incredibly user obsessed, because you can have as many fancy letters after your name and put a device in front of someone, but they could not like it whatsoever. And that's really what matters, is building something that people want and actually improves people's lives.
Thank you. I think that's a great note to end on. Thank you both so much for sharing your experiences and your thus far expertise. Thank you.